Thank you for not giving up on me, for appearing when they caused my disappearance, when they abducted me. On the morning of Saturday, April 18th, 2015, I approached the Harvard Yard and found the area in front of the John Harvard statue to be transformed. The usual eager and unsuspecting tourists in line to touch the foot were replaced by a line of people standing in front of the statue and holding signs that read, Todos somos Ayotzinapa, hashtag Harvard Go Mexico, Boston for Ayotzinapa, among many others. A group of around 100 people crowded around this line, and in the center of the semicircle was one of my own classmates reading aloud a poem that spoke about the history of Mexico and the continued strength of a people. As she spoke, the crowd almost rhythmically snapped along, and passionate moans or ums were sometimes thrown into the mix. For the next half hour, 6 more people stood in the center of the semicircle and performed, their prepared piece aloud, and the same reactions emerged from the crowd. People walking by occasionally stopped and listened, but for the most part, the same people remained throughout this event. The last poem was in fact performed in Spanish, and to my surprise, everyone seemed to understand still. Their reactions were unchanged. Its subject? Brotherhood, unity, resistance, hope, the discovery of quote-unquote the 43. This poem is what I distributed in class and what I hopefully will get to touch on later on in this presentation. So who are the people holding signs in front of the John Harvard statue? What is the relationship between the people in attendance? What is their aim? What led them there? Why is this event taking place? How do they think that the poetry slam will affect and help them achieve their aims? This is the subject of my ethnographic final paper. But first, we must contextualize what they're talking about when they say the 43. And in order to do this, we have to take a little mental trip to Mexico. So on September 26, 2014, a group of about 100 student teachers from the Raúl Isidro Burgos Rural Teachers College of Ayotzinapa, which is a teacher training university located in Guerrero, Mexico, that was founded with the purpose of raising living standards for impoverished Mexicans by teaching poor farmers to read and write, traveled to Iguala, Mexico, which is about 2 hours away, seeking to raise money to fund upcoming protests against what they described as unjust hiring practices that overwhelmingly favor urban students' teachers over rural ones. Being that it was dark by the time they finished fundraising and their university was located more than 2 hours away, as I just said, they decided that walking back probably wouldn't be as safe as it was during the daytime. So after many failed attempts at hitching a ride off the freeway, the group of teachers decided to commandeer or take over 3 local buses from a nearby terminal. Suddenly and quote-unquote without warning, eyewitnesses said that the local police, which the state prosecutor has admitted is infiltrated with dozens of members of the local Guerreros Unidos drug gang, they began to shoot fire at the buses filled with unarmed students. Instead of driving off hurriedly, which was according to the Guardian the expected consequence, the students stopped the bus and got out in an attempt to, negotiate and conversate with the police. And although the police did put down their arms after the buses stopped, 3 bystanders and 3 students had already been killed during the initial ambush. And moreover, rather than explain to the students why they were firing at the bus in the first place, the police took most of the students to jail for holding and refused to conversate with them. The next day, 43 of these student teachers had cryptically disappeared from the jail cells and were nowhere to be found. They were formally declared missing 24 hours later. So what was Mexico's reaction to this? We shall look at a couple of videos to kind of help illustrate.
The most important, most symbolic avenue here in Mexico City. Right now, thousands of people have gathered to protest the disappearance of 43 teaching students in the southern state of Guerrero and the killing of 6 others. Most of them are all enrolled in one school, the Ayotzinapa Normal School.
As we just saw, Mexico's reaction was violent. It consists of protests and march, and it caused also a lot of international attention, a considerable amount. But on November 7, 2014, a little more than a month after the investigation, the case was declared to be solved, quote-unquote, by the state. All 43 students, they explained, had been handed over to the same gang to which many local police officers belonged to, the Guerreros Unidos. The members of the gang in police custody admitted that, quote-unquote, after the students were handed over to them, they murdered them and burned their remains. Accepting that this was a corrupt, unjust, and inexcusable act, the Mexican government issued an apology, but also urged the nation to move on. As Mexico's Attorney General Murillo Karam infamously said before he declared this case officially closed, "Ya me cansé," or "I'm tired already." Um, but is this the end of story? Is this the end of the story for the people of Mexico? Um, is this a story that is accepted by them? As we will see with Caravana 43, it's not. The families of the 43 students are far from tired and refuse to accept the news from a government that they claim has a history of using torture and other traumatizing techniques to draw out fake confessions that are then used to construct a fake narrative of events. Because they feel that the Mexican government has given up on their children and offered an unconvincing story, 14 pairs of parents have partnered up with a national coalition composed of a variety of groups and organizations that support their cause and created the movement project that is today known as Caravana 43. In an effort to gain the support and action from the U.S. government that they feel they have failed to find from their own government, the parents and their allies have split into 3 caravans that have been and are still currently traveling throughout the Pacific, Central, and Atlantic regions of the United States. They then stop at major cities and hold events ranging from press conferences to informative talks to peaceful marches to moving poetry slams, which we saw at Harvard. All in the efforts of raising awareness throughout the United States with the ultimate goal of inspiring the U.S. government to pressure the Mexican government into reopening the case and punishing all those involved. Let's take a look at their website, to gain a little more insight. Caravana 43, just like it says, is a project developed with the purpose of bringing to the United States parents and classmates of the 43 Normalista students who disappeared on September 26, 2014. We can go to temas de discusión. Let's go to the translated version. Number 1, to keep the demand for justice. Ask for support from the Latino community to keep the movement alive even at a distance. The Caravanas, we have the Pacific, all the organizations that are supporting them. So now that we've finished establishing context for both the events in Mexico and the Caravana campaign that emerged out of it, our research questions, our guiding research questions will be, how did their events raise awareness, Caravanas events, specifically the poetry slam held in Harvard? What is the relationship among the people in attendance of these events? The people reading the poems, the people holding the signs, the people in attendance, and what are their reactions? What are their thoughts? And most importantly, what is the role of language during this event? So the theoretical framework that I will use will be, firstly, we're going to enter this conversation as a linguistic anthropologist, right? In the language of Durante. My focus as an observer of the poetry slam will be on the manner in which language was employed throughout the event. This does not mean that my paper will focus solely on things like grammatical structure of the poems or like the level of vocabulary employed by performers. Rather, as Durante explains, my ultimate purpose will be to produce, quote-unquote, ethnographically grounded accounts of linguistic structures as used by real people in real time and real space. Being that the fundamental characteristic of linguistic anthropology is understanding language in the context as a cultural practice, then it's important to specify the particular definition of culture this paper will adopt, which is a system of participation. In Lave's definition, it's a particularly useful notion of culture for looking at how language is used in the real world, because to speak a language means to be able to participate, in the interactions with a world that is always larger than us as individual speakers, and even larger than what we can see and touch. I will argue, therefore, that language has the potential to connect us to other human beings and even lead to the formation of communities. Furthermore, in analyzing these events, I will use Delheim's speaking model in order just to provide structure to the analysis of language. And also incorporate Stephen Feld and his idea of the discursive nature of communication, which has it touches more, again, on context, on the importance of context. Language is not an individual thing. The importance of it is seen as it connects to other things. So my methodology will be, firstly, the analysis of language using the Caravana 43 website. But most of it, will consist of ethnographic evidence conducted by me. I'm going to use the tactic of autoethnography, in kind of like describing what I saw at the event of the Caravana Poetry Slam at Harvard. And within that, I'm going to imply different aspects of Leiv's system of participation, as well as the speaking model. And lastly, as you see, as you will see rather, I'm going to analyze the poem, the last poem read at the Harvard Poetry Slam, which I will have distributed in class, which I just think is particularly powerful, and which I have translated so everyone will be able to understand. So the Poetry Slam. The Poetry Slam, I'm using the lens of a linguistic anthropologist. As I said, I'm focusing on language, things like signs held up, poems being recited, and of course, felt in the importance of the context in which poems are delivered. While he talked about music, I'm going to argue that poems can be seen as music. It's a performance. It's the ums and the moans. It's kind of like something that we both participate in as participants. Even me, like attending the event. I snapped, I moaned, I was feeling the rhythms of the voice of the poet. And in that, I hope to do the S and A and the N part of the speaking. The S setting and scene, A act sequence, and N norms. Which has to do with the snaps and the moans. I know that sounds weird, but it's kind of like a feeling of I get you, I understand you. And then interviews. I also conducted several interviews. By several, I mean four. Two of them were from the organization Boston for Ayotzinapa, which was actually an organization that was formed in Boston because of what happened. So it's been around for about 4 or 5 months, and it's just mostly Mexicans that immigrated, and they keep up to date with these events, and they were as infuriated as the people living in their nation still. One Boston University student and one Boston community member. Some quotes that I picked up for this presentation in particular was "No nos vamos a rendir, we won't give up," which was said by a young man. His name was Ramon, who is a lead organizer for Boston for Ayotzinapa. Another quote which I found interesting was from Valeria, who attends Boston University, and it was "Ellos ya no nos pueden ignorar." Sorry, I didn't translate it here, but they can no longer ignore us. And the last one is from Lucia, which she told me she just lived in Boston and she heard about this event. And her quote is, "I think it's inspiring the way all of us can come together regardless of whether we are here or there, U.S. or Mexico." Carta a Padres, which you have in your hands, we will be talking about, or I will be talking about rather, in my presentation, the genre. What type of text is this? Brothers and sisters and thank you and village and united. What type of genre is this, and how does that affect the speaking that's going on, the transmission of language and participants, the P part of it. It's important. It's important that the people were snapping and moaning and nodding. It's the context is definitely taken into account when the poet is reading, which I will analyze. And then language used in the Caravana website. We have already looked at the website, but the Latino community, the Mexican government, the first purpose, the first talking point was to establish a sort of system of support. They hope that the people that are Latino, the people that are Mexican, their brothers and sisters, quote unquote, will support their cause, will support and pressure the U.S. government to pressure the Mexican government, And in that, it's also a polarizing, like, us versus them. That's created by the language used, like, brother or not, sister or not. Are you in this cause that we all are in, or are you not? Are you the oppressor or the oppressed? Which I think is interesting, and I also want to incorporate the ends part of the speaking model. What is the end part of Caravana 43? What do they want to achieve with it? What do you want to achieve with this poem? What do you want to achieve with these signs? What do you want to achieve with this website? And, my ultimate findings, which I will argue in my paper, is the transnationality of the Mexican community and identity. The ability of language to reinforce these communities, this sense of community at least, this Mexican identity. They're relying on the support, in my opinion, not of any American, but rather of Mexican Americans. The brothers and sisters who are merely living somewhere else. Ultimately, the sense of community is still there, which I think is really interesting. And the second part is language plays an important part in the preservation and intensification in this community, of this community. You know, they're this is something that they're experiencing, that's empowering them, that's moving them. Hashtag Harvard con Mexico is also a good example of this. These signs, these they're showing their support. They're showing that they're part of this community, that they feel for this community. And finally, language also is a tool of resistance. This is what this is, the Caravana 43, a kind of switch of the roles, a switch of hierarchy. You silence me, and now I'm going somewhere else, and I'm going to try to raise awareness and raise support from somewhere where you're not here, where you don't have jurisdiction, where you're not going to shut me up, or you're not going to close the case. And ultimately, it is a polarizing mechanism. So that's what I will argue. So any questions, any ideas, any suggestions too are also very much welcome. Before I start actually cranking this thing this weekend, hopefully. Is my focus too broad? Do I attempt to do too much in limited space? Any additional ideas for a theoretical focus? Authors used, maybe also like my approach taken, anything at all, questions about the context or context in general. I think this is a super interesting event that happened, and I'm really excited that it came to Harvard and that I was able to attend and practice as a linguistic anthropologist. All the tools, put on my anthropology hat, if you will. And thank you so much thank you for watching.